let's take a look at your final project drafts and give you guys some feedback, and then you'll take that for what you will and do some revisions. I think overall it was a really strong group that was submitted. So there's some, I think in general, really mostly minor tweaking and things like that. I think, again, everybody did an excellent job and had a strong showing. So for a lot of these, when I open the InDesign files, I might be missing fonts. When you export them, it's not going to be as important. And when you package them, it's not going to be as important. We'll talk about that when we get to packaging, because it will include fonts and things like that. So for the purposes of this demo, it might not be appropriate. Nope, not the right word. For the purposes of this video, it might not present exactly the same as your screen with the fonts, but we can address this in class, and I can take a better look if it's not flowing properly on mine because I'm missing the fonts. Anyway, here we go. So we'll start with Jack's. I think overall, really well designed. As we scroll through the spreads, everything reads pretty well. It's tough to see, again, how the text will flow completely just because I'm missing this font, so I don't know how stylized it is. But in general, I think it flows really well. I think there's some room to play around a little bit. I think you have a good variety of images, variety of sizes. For some of them, I would just double check to make sure that you're not cropping the image. It looks like you might be cropping this a little bit. I always do the wrong one. Fit content to frame. No, that's not what we want. Fit proportionally. There we go. So you want to make sure that you're not stretching your images at all, right? So you want to make sure that you're fitting proportionally and constraining those proportions. Again, so we're not cropping or stretching our photos. I just want to make sure. I just didn't want to say that the third time. You want to make sure that you're not cropping. Anyway, checking with fitting proportionally. We'll double check that. But yeah, I think overall, a pretty good start. I think some things that we could talk about are, and this goes for everybody as well, and I'll mention it in class, but we don't need to have a previous and next on every single page. I should have been more specific on each spread. So theoretically, when we export these, we're going to export them as a spread, so it'll export reading this whole spread, so we could really just hit next and go to this next go to this next spread rather than the next page. If we were exporting these as single pages, having arrows on both sides would be more important. I probably didn't go into that specifically, but I am now, and I'll address this in class as well. So I think we can get rid of these two middle ones, and that might free up some space a little bit here. I think overall, I'm going to zoom out. I think overall your first page, your first spread works really, really well. I think your image, these are the only images that we are allowed to crop, the two portraits of him. But I think overall the image, this pull quote and the graphic work well for a simple graphic, and then a nice larger image that includes sort of a retrospective, and then the text flowing in our three columns works really well. My relatively minor, I say relatively because it's part of the assignment, but relatively minor critique here is to have some sort of headline. So you could even have like Richard Prince and then have like a line underneath whatever your headline is going to be. It's up to you to make that up. But I think overall you could squeeze that in, even if you made this a little bit smaller, brought these in a little bit. You give yourself room for a headline. But I think your first spread works really, really well. And I think subsequent spreads, I think this one works pretty well as well. I think for the most part you stick to this 3-column format, obviously, which is good. But I think you could maybe even play with like this and have the text go across both columns here, and then continue in this column, and maybe the same for this page, or even this page. Just kind of play around with that. Some elements breaking over. Like you have this image here. Some elements breaking over two columns. And again, even if you went with one of these images and had it bigger across the bottom here, and then had these two frames, the text go across these two columns. Yeah, I think that would work really well. Sorry, I lost my place. And then maybe making these headers a little bit smaller. They are a little bit big because, I mean, again, you have your sort of headline-ish with the Richard Prince is fairly large. But yeah, I think you have these section headings are a little bit big. You could probably drop those down a lot. Maybe stylize them a little bit. Maybe even carry part of this graphic, even though like it's aligned. You have this graphic carried out through here. You know, even if you have it in here, it might be a little much. But if you drop those down in size and had the line underneath or even a line above to kind of carry that graphic throughout your entire article. Really, the more important thing is making sure that your images aren't being cropped. And even if you have to resize and maybe even drop an image or two to resize the next one a little bit bigger, that might open things up and let it breathe a little bit more. But yeah, I think overall, again, a really good start. Again, headline, making sure you're not distorting or cropping images, and then, you know, see if you can work some of this graphic, carry that through, you know, your whole design. Even if you didn't have it go across the middle, if you had, you know, a piece go from left to right on this side, and then even like over here, have it go from, or rather right to left on this side, and then have it go left to right here and right to left here, you know, left justified, right justified, etc. To give it a little bit of movement, make it a little bit more dynamic, and then playing with a little bit more with breaking some of these column structures with the text a little bit. I think could go a long way. All right, going on to hunters. I'll zoom out again. Sort of scroll through so we can generally see. Here's our third spread. Yeah, so for this one, for the text, from what we have so far, I think it's a good start. Again, we're missing a headline rather than just his name. So you might even be able to drop this down a little bit, give yourself room for a headline, or even include it. It doesn't have to be at the top, but even if you included it, you know, breaking across these two columns, etc. You want to make sure that you're including all the text from the copy. This goes for everybody, making sure that you're placing your text into the frames rather than copying and pasting, so they show up as a linked document. Yeah, I think overall your first page is a good start. I think this image is a little bit small, so even if you made that a little bit bigger, and then you could have like the text wrap around this way maybe, in a similar way it wraps around this corner. And then for these, I didn't know if you were going to have your galleries just be galleries and have all of your text here. I don't think it would fit on one page, but we can take a look at that. But if you wanted to just have like a middle gallery and then continue text on the third page, I thought it was you and I that had talked about it previously, but maybe not. I wouldn't overlap these images, or even if you did, maybe just a slight overlap in the corner or something like that, because, you know, again, here you're covering most of the image. So even if you had, this is again sort of quick and ugly, but if you had these, well, where'd you go? There we go. If you had these overlap, as I'm grabbing the wrong thing. There we go. I was just grabbing the image. So if you had this one a little bit smaller, you know, had your frame a little bit smaller here, again, sort of mirroring that, fitting proportionally. So if you were to have them overlap, I generally wouldn't do it unless there was a specific reason you were doing it, like if you're going to have text wrap around it, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. You know, even if you had, again, sort of quick, oops, as I keep grabbing the frame rather than, you know, even if you had this one overlap this way, have another one there. You know, something like that, if you wanted to have them be a little bit more dynamic. If they were to overlap, I generally don't recommend it, but if there's a specific design aesthetic that you were trying to achieve, we could talk about it. But if you do have them overlap, I would have them overlap in less conspicuous areas, so where you're not covering you're not covering the content. And then, again, it's just going to depend on what you're going to do with this last page, how the text is going to flow with it. I might resize your images a little bit to make them a little bit more dynamic. If you had this one sort of more in the bottom corner, this one in the top corner, and then you can have text in between, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe play around with, I guess it's going to depend on how you fill out the rest of it with text and how your text flows. And then again, with this one, like I said, with everybody, you don't have to have your previous next on all the pages, just on each spread. So you're effectively going to have, for the first page, I guess you technically don't really need it, but we'll include it. But you could have a previous here, and then a next here, and so forth. Previous, and then next. So that doesn't change your design all that much. And then we're just making sure that we're including a link. You could even turn that juxtapose into a link to Juxtapose Magazine. All that good stuff. But yeah, overall, I think a fairly good start. A lot of this is going to depend on how you fill out that text and flesh out the rest of your text to work with your graphics there. All right. Moving on here. I'll scroll through. So I think this one is almost in opposition to the last one. So we have quite a bit of text, in this one. As far as formatting goes, it should be obviously it's all the same text in everybody's assignment. I think your headline works pretty well. Artist and infamous appropriation. I think, again, if you formatted that a little bit, maybe even made this a little bit smaller because it gets a little bit somewhat cluttered here. If you made this Richard Prince just a tiny bit smaller to really separate this from this headline. I don't mind this sort of like pull quote-ish look you have going here. The one major thing I will say about this layout is, especially if you zoom out like this, you can see sort of how cluttered your text gets a little bit. I would play around with your format, not play around with your formatting, but I would make sure that your formatting is consistent. You can see you have a lot of inconsistencies here with your text formatting. That's going to help, again, if your text is placed rather than copy and pasted, so you don't get like blocks of different formatting. And if you go back to our character and paragraph styling assignment from way earlier on, that might help, so that way you can have presets and have consistency through your text. I think, again, in this case, I think it works here where you have text sort of in this one column and then text going across these two columns, and then you have text going across all three columns here and wrapping around this photo. I might go back to 3 columns here with this group, because this does sort of read like one sort of kind of awkward giant block of text, and then you sort of have similar things going on here rather than just having a text wrap, a large frame and a text wrap go around this. I might play with the dynamics a little bit. If you wanted to have these in 3 columns, and then have some sort of graphic or something breaking it up, and then have this be 1 column going across all 3 columns. This, I think, wouldn't be too bad if it's you have the column breaking across 3 and then it effectively kind of pushes here. You're going to want to push that text wrap. I'll zoom back in. You're going to want to push this text wrap here so that it pushes this text into this frame kind of. So you want to make sure that when you're working with your padding, you want to offset that padding a little bit more, so that it's not as close to the images. Again, here there's a little bit of an overlap. I might make this image a little bit smaller just so that overlap doesn't overlap too much. And then again here, just making sure that your text is consistent, and then maybe even play with image placement here to see if you can have this. This sort of reads a little bit awkwardly, especially right there. You might want to have this be one column and then 2, 3, and have this continue down. This one is a little bit awkward. We might need to play around with some of your image formatting and your text formatting there, where this one reads a little bit better, but again, you have some inconsistencies in text sizes, things like that, so it makes it a little bit visually distracting to read. Again, I think overall, pretty good start. Some minor tweaking with the headline area here, and then really this one is more text formatting rather than image formatting. Again, we want to double check and make sure that we're not stretching our photos at all, but I think this one would be more focused on your copy and your text consistencies and formatting here, but again, a really good start. All right, moving on to cats here, and again, I'll scroll through. As you can see, this one's a little bit more graphically heavy, which was more intended to be a neutral comment, not positive or negative. And then I wasn't sure, I think you might have mentioned this, I wasn't sure if these were sort of your thumbnails that you were including in your document, or these were other alternative layouts to sort of continue the idea, but we can talk about that in class. I think overall for this one, there's not a whole ton of critique I would have for this, to be honest. Again, really just working with text formatting. I'm missing a font here, so it's tough to tell that's full quote. But depending on the size and the look of it, I can check it out in class. I might push that so it's a little bit bigger. Again, sort of that kind of thing. If you're making, if you're gonna have a difference in between the two font styles, you want to make sure that there's a huge difference, whether it's size, font, type, like bold, italics, etc. You really want to push that difference. There might be a huge difference. I don't know because I don't have this font, so we can look at that in class. But I would potentially push that and make that a little bit bigger. And then another thing we can do too is you have, I'm going to overprint preview this. There we go. So I'm going to overprint preview that just so we get rid of all the frame edges. It just hides that visual so you can see it. It's a little bit more clean. Where I think some of the lines, which are just frame lines, they're not going to print, are a little bit visually distracting. So you can kind of potentially see how your text formats. And again, here, I don't know if you'd want to include a graphic, or even if we did for these pull quotes, for that one it might look a little awkward, but even if you had the pull quote in that, continue that sort of maroon box graphic, if you had, even if you had a partial shape, you have all these very interesting lines and line work going, so even if you had this sort of like odd shape behind it, and then again continuing that to really just separate it a lot more, but also kind of continue that interesting graphic you have going on. Really for this one, I think your text formatting works really well. Again, here we could just have the navigation buttons on the outsides of the pages. You don't need them on the inside, which actually might help this, not that it's bad, but help this layout a little bit, make it a little bit more consistent with having your arrows in the corners there. I think this one is going to be more making sure we're formatting pictures, we're not cutting things off. I don't think you are in a lot of areas, which is great. Yeah, I might even sort of lastly to nitpick, I'm just going through pictures as I'm talking and doing at the same time. I think maybe playing around with the formatting, these lines are just they're just a visual, they're not like a glitch. They should go away. There we go. Just a little glitch from scrolling. Yeah, I might play around with your formatting. I think for your first page it works pretty well. You might play around with this a little bit if you wanted to sort of push that shape and have like push your text. So what might help here, and also what I was going to say about your headline, I think works really well. I think maybe even pushing that so it's larger, like much larger, even across the whole top here, and then you could have the image basically stay the shape and drop it down a little bit, and then that might push this text a little bit. And if you really to really emphasize that kind of shape, if you wanted to do that, you don't have to change the size of this graphic and image, just drop it down a little, and then maybe even extend, even if you wanted to extend that red shape down this way, to sort of continue that angular thing you have going. But I would definitely make your headline much bigger, so it's like a headline, and then that also separates it from these sort of section headers that you have. And I think lastly for this third page, really only maybe play around with having this be 2 columns rather than 3. See if it works. It may not. Kind of like you have here. You have the 2 columns here, and then even on this one you have like the 2 columns here. I think having that, keeping that sort of, not that it's inconsistent, but that inconsistency consistent, if that makes sense. You could have these be 2 columns and then this be a third and drop down. Again, it may or may not work, but I think overall, just some minor tweaks with this one, making sure graphically your images are not cropped, and then really just kind of pushing this headline so it reads more as a headline. Maybe continuing some of these graphics to separate your pull quotes a little bit, and playing with a little bit of text formatting on the third page there. I think might help it overall. Super strong design, and I like the graphic use and the colors used in it. All right, and then I'm not sure if I'm missing these images. They don't show up as a link. And I just clicked the button and I thought it was going to open something. So yeah, we can take a look at this in the classroom, but I'm not sure. But again, we could just use the next and previous on this side. I'll scroll through before I start talking. But yeah, these are kind of showing up as like they look sort of like a missing image, unless that is your image. So I think for this one, again, a good start. I think here we need to work on our text and our column flow a little bit. I think your headline, is a good headline. It's hyphenating, so that makes it a little bit awkward. So if you wanted to have this kind of look, you could even have it in separate frames. You could have appropriation or ownership. So if this was like left justified, right justified, so it's on a separate line and have like a graphic, or you could create that in Illustrator even if you wanted to, and import it in, kind of like we did with the magazine cover assignment. I like to start here with a quote, and then going into the into the article, and then even this image going across almost all 3 columns, but across the spine as well. I think that works really well to set up your first spread. My minor critique with that would be, I think these 3 images here are a little bit small. Maybe if you wanted to just include 1 image here and then have text effectively go across 2 columns. What I think is ending up happening here is you have, you're losing a bit of your column here, so what you have left over is kind of awkward. Again, even if you wanted to have 1 image here or even 1 image up in this corner area and then have the text go across this like 2 2/3 columns would even work. I think that your text columns here just are a little bit awkward, and then this is a little bit image heavy. I might just include 1 image, or if you can, like a more vertical image in this area or in this area, and then have your text be in like 1 column across here. And then just kind of stylizing that headline a little bit more. But I think overall that your spread sets up for a potentially really good opening for the rest of the article. And then again, we want to make sure that you're formatting your images and we're not cropping them. I think some of these, I don't know if I changed those or you changed those, but I think some of these might be getting cropped a little bit. But I think for these next 2 pages, I think what we can just kind of work on is, being a little bit more dynamic, like this one. Like this page is, while there's some critique, definitely, there's some really great dynamic layout structure happening here. And I think to kind of continue that, it kind of gets a little bit more static, 3 column, image, 1, 2, 3, and everything, except for this kind of 1 goes across both columns. But effectively you kind of have a sort of more static next couple of pages. You have a next couple of pages that are a little bit static. I think you could sort of continue that more dynamic layout that you've already set up in that first page, and really just kind of concentrate on formatting your columns and making them a little bit more dynamic. And when I say that, like, not to necessarily copy this, but again, like, this is so strong and dynamic. And then you kind of go to a little bit more rigid format in these next 2. I think sort of taking that dynamism from that first page and sort of doing something somewhat similar for the next 2 pages. And again, you might need to drop some of these images because they're a little bit smaller, even if you had 1 or 2 images to work with. Again, with that frame and text formatting, I think could go a long way. All right, continuing on. All right. I'll zoom out a little bit and then scroll through again for Alexander's. And we'll scroll through. All right, and I think for this one it's going to be like similar comments to Sean's. I think you have a pretty strong intro. I like the idea of, even if you had, you have your previous and your next, I think are a little bit inconsistent. I think what we need to focus on here in this layout is again, a little bit more consistency through the pages and a little bit more of a balanced layout. So you have your previous here, and then your next is a little bit above and in sort of an awkward place. Even if you wanted to put your previous, here, and your next here, and then move these in a little bit. And again, even here, your titles for your juxtapose on the right side and the left side, as I said that backwards, are in a couple different places. So there's a lot of inconsistencies going on with your general overall layout. So I think sort of refining those and making them a little bit more consistent throughout the pages would go a long way. But I think overall this intro spread works really well. I like the idea of having this image, the main image here, sort of in the middle and going across a couple columns. I might even make it a little bit bigger, drop it down a little bit. Again, if you moved this previous down here, that would give you a little bit more room. But if you drop this down a little bit and then sort of stylized the headline a little bit, give yourself a little bit more room. Really, you can kind of take up a horizontal space this way and then drop this down and still give it some room to breathe. And then again, even like dropping this down, dropping this image down a little bit, depending on how you're going to do your text formatting. But if you had your text and frame formatting, there we go. Your text and frame formatting, if it wrapped around here, and even if this was 3 columns, it went 1, 2, 3, and continued onto another text column. And then, going onto this page, I might try having your text go across these 2 columns and see how that looks. It might be too cluttered, it might be too busy, but it might be interesting to see sort of a larger block of text with these larger images that you have. But again, we want to make sure that we're not cropping. So I'm going to fit that frame. I like the idea of what you have. I'm going to adjust the frame slightly, but we'll still want to fit proportionally. I might give yourself, there we go. This is going to be a little bit overdone, but I might give yourself a little bit more room here to play. But even if we formatted these, in the gallery context, you could crop a little bit of the top of this image, but you're cropping, effectively this is the artwork, even that pedestal. So you're cropping the artwork. But if you wanted to keep that relative size, I would fit this image proportionally, and then you could still have it go across the 2 columns, and then even make this a little bit bigger and make this a little bit smaller and fit as you need to. But I like the idea of having sort of this more image heavy area here, and then text heavy, if this was rather 1 column instead of 2, would definitely give yourself a little bit of room to separate these 2 images and make sure we're not cropping these. Again, you can crop this one a little bit, but really, this whole pedestal here, even if you wanted to focus on this particular image, some of the ones that are in a gallery context that have multiple pieces in them, we can crop, we can talk about. But even still, like, you're effectively cropping the art here because this is the bottom of this pedestal is part of the piece. So even if you swapped these and had this image up top and then this image down below, even if we put it over here, or I like having it go across the spine, but that might give you a little bit more room to have the whole image in there. But I like the idea of having sort of an image heavy, almost 2/3, and then have a text heavy 1/3. Again, I would see how that looks with in two column, or rather one column. And again, keeping that same formatting with your previous and next. Your buttons are kind of all over the place a little bit, so just making those elements consistent. And then again, I would say the same thing for this page. While it's image heavy, you're cropping a lot of the image. Even here, if you wanted to show this more retrospective, I would have it there, crop off that ceiling, and then even if you wanted to drop this whole frame down further, and then you have this image is really just a top of, again, if we fit proportionally, you can see how different the image is. If you wanted to have a more horizontal image, taking up most of this space, I would find an image that's more like that. As an example, I'm just going to double this one, but as an example, as I'm getting the beach ball, there we go. Somewhat as an example, you wouldn't do this necessarily, but if you wanted to have, oops, so I'm rotating by accident. If you wanted to have two images, again, that were sort of more, you wouldn't use the same image, obviously, just to sort of show you, but you want to find an image that's more horizontal. But I like the idea, again, having it a little bit more image heavy, and then having these columns be just mostly text. Again, working with the consistencies between your buttons and your information, and I think playing around with your text formatting could go a long way here. All right, then we're going to get out of InDesign and hit the last two here in, zoom out, in Reader or Acrobat. Let me go to the first page here. All right, then I'll scroll through and we'll take a look. Yeah. So again, for this one, I think it would be like some similar comments. I might. Well, what's happening there? There we go. I might move your buttons, your previous and next, maybe down to the bottom, as they're in the middle. Oh, I see what's happening. There's a rollover happening. That's why that's done that. We can talk about that. That's in the formatting of the object. No big deal. I was wondering why that flashing was happening. I really like your setup for your intro page. That font is excellent. Sort of has this kind of interesting vintage vibe that goes well with the sort of more vintage image here. I think it's sort of tough to tell, but I think you have this black bounding box, which I'm not sure is purposeful. I think it looks good, but I think there's some tweaks that we can do if you want to have that black stroke on that frame. I might drop down this image a little bit so that there's a separation. So this black line, so there's like a little bit of a white space before you get to this image. So that really sort of emphasizes that that black stroke around that frame. Maybe make this just a tiny bit smaller to give it a little space. Essentially give it a little margin with that headline. But I think overall, you have some really good formatting. I might try, if you wanted to, it may or may not work. Again, if you drop down this image so there's a little bit of space, so you have this black rectangle, and then if you continued that rectangular shape around this quote, might sort of, it still looks visually, it looks pretty good. Like I said, that may make it busier, or it may tie that whole first spread together a little bit. I might try it just to see. And then I think for this one, I think your 3-column formatting works well here because you have such an image-heavy intro page. I think that works well. Again, I think maybe moving these, as I hover over them again, I think maybe moving your buttons down, even if you push the juxtapose and your page numbers in a little bit, and then had your previous and next down in the bottom corners. So that way it's not so awkward in this area here, I think could work. And then I might, again, like with some of the others, I might play around with your text formatting a little bit. So again, here we have a nice sort of image-heavy right side. and then the left side have one image and then kind of 3 columns. Starts to get a little bit static on this side. So either with your character formatting, or even column formatting, or even bringing this image down a little bit and allowing a text wrap, or even having a pull quote or some sort of graphic. There's a lot of things. But basically, just work on this side being a little bit more dynamic, and I think it's going to be the same thing. Yeah, same thing for this page too. Even if you wanted to have, again, try it. It may or may not work. If you had these 2 columns combined, so this was 1 column, so it read across this way, and then had this column read down, and then this column read down, and then have these 2 columns join, so this reads as 1 column. Maybe even swapping this image, pulling this image down here, so that you have a little bit more flow, this way, so it's a little bit more dynamic. Again, it may or may not work, but I think playing around with some of your column formatting and your image formatting could go a long way here. But I think overall you have a really clean, look. I think, I keep saying formatting, but I think some formatting, maybe even if you wanted to continue this, even though it's simple, but this thin stroke on a frame, if you wanted to include that graphic in here, even as like a drop shadow behind this, that might be kind of a cool simple graphic element you could carry through your design, even if you had another just black frame here and here that offset a little bit, just to sort of set it apart a little bit, give yourself a little bit of visual interest for this piece. But I think that could go pretty far. Again, it might look busier, it might not. We could try it and find out. And then lastly, Haley's. I'll scroll through before I start talking. I think overall you have a really strong design. I think your intro spread is really well done. I like the headline, and then the use of the simple graphic works really well, balances well with the image. And then you have your headline sort of down underneath here, and then your opening paragraphs. I think here we might be able to play around again with that column formatting. If you had these 2 columns combined to 1 column reading across these 2, and then going to single columns this way, again, it may or may not work. I think your next is, I had a feeling it was going to happen. Your navigation buttons, I feel, are a little bit big. You could probably drop those down a lot, and that might open up just some breathing room, but that might open up some space for a little bit of formatting. And then you want to watch these sort of orphan lines here. Again, if you made this a little bit smaller, that might give you some room to pull this down a little bit, or even bring this up a tiny bit, so you have at least a couple lines here where you have this kind of orphaned line that sort of belongs with this paragraph that's stuck over here. I like your page numbering, and you're sort of continuing that graphic here, that simple rectangular graphic, and I like how your page numbering is in the middle. Works really well. And then again, just some basic formatting. I think again you're carrying that nice consistent graphic through your all of your spreads. I think again making your next and previous buttons a bit smaller. I like the sort of image heavy graphic, I guess, you have on this side. And then on this side, I might make, it may or may not work. Again, I like how you're carrying this graphic through. I might drop this image down here just to sort of separate it a little bit from this graphic, and that'll sort of make your text flow slightly different. You'll have some text maybe start up here, and then have the image, and then have it broken up. And again, it may or may not work. But again, I like how you're carrying through this graphic. Again, I think this image is just a little bit small. Even if you got, again, this may or may not work, but if you got rid of this image and then made this sort of graphic area a little bit bigger, even if it went about halfway through this column, and then you'd have to reformat this, which you can make a little bit smaller, and sort of fit into this area. So you had this blue info area relatively kind of like down in this area, and then you would have that give this a little bit of separation, but you would have these two related just given their color, and that might make for a little bit more dynamic layout without having to change this text too much. You know, again, making these graphics a little bit bigger may or may not work, but it's something that could potentially be worth a try. And then lastly, you know, again, I think these, how you have these blue or cyan informational boxes, I think work really well on this page. As you can see, they're sort of separated. This graphic gets a little bit lost when you have it so close, I think, to these larger graphics. Yeah, to where you have, you know, again, you have this graphic on the left side of all of these. I think they're a little bit more separated, so they work a little bit better. And again, maybe making this a little bit smaller, and then that'll allow you to drop these down, or even drop this one down a little bit, or even without that, drop this image down, not a ton, but maybe just down slightly, so that these aren't aligned. If they're off a little bit, and give yourself a little bit of space, because you have some nice space here in between the graphic and the image. And then again, here you have some nice space between the graphic and the image, but then here they're butting right up against each other. So if you can kind of mimic that space that you have, and then if that steps this down a little bit, that actually might make a bit of a more dynamic section, as having this image sort of step down to this image and then step down to this image might work well. And then I think the 3-column format, I think, works well here, because you have, you know, sort of this 3-image format going on. You know, I think for this page, again, just some minor tweaks. Drop this down a little bit, make your navigation a little bit smaller. But yeah, I think overall, I really like the use of the graphic. I really like the use of the color throughout. It's just a little tiny touch of color carried throughout the entire article, works really well. And then again, we sort of talked about going way back to 2D design, or even a little bit in Illustrator. You know, we talked about carrying through consistencies like that. This is a really good example of that, to where we have, you know, again, even though these are different colors, you have this rectangular graphic and then this rectangular graphic. They're going to relate in shape, and then things that are similar colors are going to relate given their similar colors. So you're still kind of carrying through, you know, carrying through these consistencies through formatting, through either color, size, shape, etc. So you can kind of create these relationships through these different design relationships and things like that. But I think overall, again, you know, super strong start. Some relatively minor tweaks with this one. Again, I think everyone did a great job overall, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do with revisions.